Hi, everyone. Today we have a special guest on DataStream, Bill Shube from the Lego Group, where he leads the efforts around analytics and systems. Bill, can you say a few words to introduce yourselves to our audience?
Yeah, great to be here, Amir. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I work for the Ledger Group. I've been doing supply chain analytics for them for the past 12 years. Before I talk further, I should just provide a little bit of fine print because do need to clarify that I'm not here on behalf of the Lego Group. I don't speak on behalf of them. I'm here on my own behalf, on behalf of the company that I'm trying to get started up as well, with Supply Chain Watchtower, where I hope to provide supply chain analytics services to small to mid-sized manufacturers and distributors. There, end of fine print. But yeah, I've been doing supply chain analytics for a long time, and I wouldn't say I lead supply chain analytics. I'm not that much of a big shot, but lately I've kind of fallen into work with no code tooling, and that's really kind of driven a lot of success over the past few years for me and my team.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. Really appreciate having you. So, one of the things I think anyone who would look you up online and, maybe especially on LinkedIn would kind of notice pretty much immediately is, dude, you really built a voice around what other industries might call a citizen developer, and you mentioned no code tools for analytics, which is, I don't know if you appreciate this, very rare in our industry. We have an industry that is, let's call it traditional, doesn't typically adopt new technologies. And here you are using what is definitely cutting edge technologies and tools to apply to everyday work in your processes and in your consulting work. How did it come about that you started dabbling in so many cutting edge tools? It's so rare.
Uh, First of all, I'll say it's flattering to be called cutting edge. I don't see myself that way. And yeah, I mean, the first time we spoke about this, you called me, I think, an enigma or something like that. I was puzzled because I really feel like I just do what I need to do to get the job done as effectively as possible. So how did I get started doing this? I mean, um, I, I was an Excel guy for a long time. You know, when I started doing supply chain analytics, I did what we all do. I just kind of stuffing as much data as I could into Excel, writing some lookups and some VBA on top of it all, and then you hope it doesn't break. I mean, and that way of working stinks, and it always breaks. And I got tired of it, and so one day I went to my manager and I said, "Hey, I think there are better tools out there." I'd heard of Power BI at the time. That was kind of like the big revelation for me. I said, "Can I go dabble in this? Can I try to find a better way of doing it?" And she was super supportive. I tried Power BI, didn't do what I needed to do, and so I started asking around, landed on Alteryx, and that completely changed everything. Within a pretty short amount of time, I had gone from those lousy Excel files to a series of automated workflows that were pulling in pretty much all the data that we needed on a regular basis, all of our bread and butter. And I was able to smash it all together into a one-stop shop for us, just drop it into Tableau, and all of a sudden we had everything at our fingertips, and it just completely changed the way that we work with data. So how did I come into it? It's kind of I kind of fell into it by accident, but it works, and I would never go back to the way things were.
As you were going through this process of implementing what is, even to your description, a completely new technology stack, essentially, for this part of an organization, how did you go about thinking about things like, okay, where do I get the data? How do I store it? Which tools might I be using? Like, is there a discovery process of finding new things and trying them out? Or is it really you kind of hit gold with Alteryx in day one?
Honestly, I did kind of hit gold. I mean, from a data source perspective, I knew where all my data was sitting because I was pulling it all out of our BW, right, a business warehouse, and so I was pulling it all out of there anyway, and there were a few files floating around a SharePoint or whatever. I knew where those were too, and I knew where all the data was that I needed. It was just that to get it all into one place, you couldn't do it in Excel. You always have to aggregate some level of detail out of it to fit everything in. And so when you do that, you end up with this report kind of looks, 14 months to 2 years out, but it's at the, at the macro level. It's not by, by your business unit or by customer. And then you can look at like the next 3 months by customer, but you can't get the full horizon, right? You're always aggregating some details out when you're dealing with Excel because it has these capacity limitations and our data needs. And like a lot of people, our data needs were increasing. And so what was maybe good enough 10 to 15 years ago to meet our needs, it just wasn't meeting our needs anymore. Yeah, that and that's why, like I said, those files always fall apart. So we just needed something more robust. And like you said, I was lucky somebody else was already using Alteryx in the company, and so I just kind of hopped on the wagon. And as you said, really, I think I struck gold. There are other tools out there. I'm happy to talk about those, but it really is a great tool. I've never worked with a piece of software that I liked better at that point anyway.
That's quite a strong endorsement, I would say. And when you think about you mentioned some benefits that these tools have, on top of the business warehouse and Excels and all these files. So you mentioned scalability and durability, uh, and flexibility. When someone thinks about, okay, what's in it for me? Change management is a tough process, I think, in our world. When someone's thinking, okay, what's in it for my organization as I'll go through this process? Is it about efficiency? Is it about discovering new insights? Is it about shortening decision cycle times?
All of the above, I would say. But when you first start doing this stuff, the first thing that you notice is the time savings. That's that's the first and most obvious one because you go from all that lousy Excel work, the right, open this file, download this from your ERP, and you write this lookup, drag the formula down to the bottom, copy paste into this other file, right? I mean, you know the drill. You go from that to push a button, go get your coffee, do some other work, come back, and it's done. So like right there, like that's the first eye-opening thing. And then yeah, I mean they're better insights because as I said, all of a sudden we had all of the data we needed at our fingertips. So we were able to see things about our work that we hadn't noticed before. We were able to make decisions faster for sure. And I mean, at this point, we built stuff that has saved us thousands of hours. We built stuff that has spotted millions of dollars worth of planning errors on a regular basis. So, all those benefits. But I think the hidden benefit that I like to cite is the data literacy. That was kind of the unexpected one that just kind of crept up on me. And I realized one day, oh, I'm way more literate in data than I used to be. And it's because these tools, whether it's Alteryx or and it's Parabola Savant, Nine, like there's a whole bunch of them. Uh, they at their core, they're writing SQL under the hood, and so you end up going from Excel, which lets you do whatever you want, right? You can write something silly in every different cell, and it's not going to put any restrictions on you. You go from that to a system that is very flexible and very powerful, but does have more data structure to it, right? It's works in terms of tables and selection criteria, filter criteria, and all the stuff that our friends in IT think about all the time and that we never understood, never knew how to talk to them about it. And so whenever IT came around and said, "Hey, we're trying to build this new system. What are your needs?" We would say, I don't know. I need orders. I need supply. I need inventory. Like it was meaningless to IT because they'd say, what's your selection criteria? And what's your filter criteria? And what are the modeling steps? And like it would all just go right over my head. And that's not the case anymore. I can talk to our IT teams. I can talk to tech people all over the place. And I don't know, I don't have the depth of knowledge that they have, but I can hold my own and I can carry on a conversation and I can understand what they're talking about, what their concerns are in a way that was never possible for me before. And I attribute it completely to this different way of working. It's much more oriented toward structured data work than the old Excel way.
I find what you're saying fascinating because I think we often observe with our customers a pattern that I think is parallel to what you're describing, which is as you're kind of developing this muscle of data-driven decision making, and you start flexing the muscle of, okay, we have a question, or we want to figure something out, or we want to model something out, or we want to plan, we can go and look at actual real data and derive actual insights and make decisions based on that versus we make this decision because this is the way we always did it, or, you just have to add 2 weeks. Well, do you really like, is 2 weeks good? Is 2 weeks bad? Maybe it's 10 days, maybe it's 20 days. All of a sudden you develop this go-to mechanism where you're saying, "Well, let's look at the data and figure it out," instead of saying, "Oh, we'll plug in some number." And what I find fascinating here is that you're saying it's actually deeper than just saying, as an organization, let's make decisions based on data. You're saying it also fosters better conversations between different parts of the organization that I think, in this safe space, we can say aren't always the best of friends between IT and supply chain.
I mean, I think any business function could stand to benefit from this. But yes, we are on a supply chain podcast. You and I are supply chain guys, so absolutely, it does foster better conversations, easier conversation, better understanding, and you can only benefit from that. I mean, I'm sure. Yeah, I've certainly been part of projects, and I've seen other projects and other organizations. I'm sure you could say the same, where it's a tech initiative that falls apart to some extent, and the main reason for that is that the business and the tech teams don't know how to talk to each other.
Yeah, and I think that happens all the time, and it's a cause of massive frustration for both sides. You made a comment on LinkedIn recently saying that a citizen developer is not a shadow IT organization. Can you expand on that? Is that connected to what we just talked about?
Yes, and it's interesting. I think it goes back to your earlier question where you're asking kind of the benefits that we get out of this. There's another side to this. So let me. I'm going to answer your question a little bit of a roundabout way because there's another side to this, which is the tech teams. And I see this in a lot of organizations. I talk to a lot of people about no code tools and implementations and whatnot, and I hear from a lot of citizen developers. They say, our IT team just does not like us using these tools, and they're scratching their heads like I've automated all this stuff. I'm getting all these great insights, and they're slapping my wrist, saying, "No, you shouldn't be doing it." Um, and what I'm learning is that there are a few reasons for that. One, the one that people go to all the time is first, just they're taking our jobs, and I don't think that's a genuine concern. I don't, or at least I don't think it's a very legitimate concern. What they tend to do is say, "This is all well and good, but do you know how to manage these tools? Do you know how to manage data? Do you know how to scale this? Not just how to build more workflows, but do you know how to do it in a way that you don't end up burying yourself under the weight of everything that you build?" And I say that like I've done that, okay, and it stinks, right? The pitfall of these tools is that they superpower your ability to work with data. They don't superpower your ability to understand how to work from data from a scalable perspective. So they don't teach you the proper methods of documentation or for data quality monitoring or from a whole slew of other things that IT teams do all the time. And so these tech teams worry that you're going to create a monster and that you're going to end up building something that's too big to fail. And you're going to throw it over the fence and say, "Okay, we can't figure this out anymore, but we need it. We're dependent upon it. Now you fix it." And IT rightfully is not down for that. So they fret about these tools quite a bit. Yeah, and even if you're running it well, it's additional infrastructure that they have to maintain. And so to answer your question, shadow IT, what I think often happens is you get you get this pushback from IT, and they start complaining that these citizen tools develop shadow IT, right? It's like they're running the regular pipelines on, Databricks or Snowflake or Azure or whatever platform they're using, and they're spinning up ingestions and the integrations, all the standard IT way with, CI/CD and all the what I don't, I always forget the terms, but all, they're doing it the right proper way. And then here's the citizen developer who just kind of picks up an Alteryx, a Parabola, or whatever, and starts, finds a way to tap into whatever database they're using, and it starts proliferating all these other tables. And I mean, we've seen people kind of stand up their own SQL servers to the side, and it kind of falls outside of the normal scope of governance of IT because they've got no visibility to it. It could be lax data security measures on that. There are some genuine problems that pop up, but they start calling it shadow IT. And and when I said it's not shadow IT, my point is that typically when you have citizen development taking place, they're filling a gap. They're filling a need that IT isn't able to deliver on it. But there are things that are needed to run the business that IT isn't able to do. And they have good reason for either not being able to do it or not getting around to it. But there are gaps, and citizen developers plug these gaps. And so, from my perspective, it's not shadow IT. It's just another way of filling a need that had previously been going unmet.
Oh, I want to connect the dots between several things that you mentioned, right? So on the one hand, there's, to your point, there's clearly a gap that the citizen developers are filling. But there's another aspect, which is the citizen developers do not have the skill sets or the depth of knowledge required to scale and maintain a lot of these things. And the third piece is there's, I don't know if the fear is the right word, but there's some hesitation from IT around, okay, what is it that we're going to have to maintain down the road? Is there a way in your mind? It sounds like you've managed to build a good relationship with your IT counterparts. What's the best way in your mind to bridge that gap? What can IT do to enable citizen developers to thrive? Maybe it's putting some guardrails, enabling the right infrastructure, helping vetting the tools. So it's not completely Wild West on the one hand, which definitely fosters innovation, lets a lot of people build a lot of cool stuff that provides a ton of value. But on the other side, it doesn't create this monster of tech debt that someone will have to clean up at some point.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you asked that question. I actually made a presentation on the topic at the Alters conference a few months ago. And so I'm going to have to kind of go back into the recesses of my brain to dig that up. But first and foremost, you do need to have a partnership between your tech teams and your business teams. There has to be some agreement that, yes, we are going to allow and enable citizen development. Because sometimes that's the first step that needs to take place. Sometimes IT just says, "No way." And so there, it's, the business team needs to get their leadership involved, and work out some agreement with IT. "Hey, we're gonna pilot this thing on a single use case, and, here's it, find a need." Like I said, they're often, IT they've got priorities, and they can't always get around to everything. And so there's always gonna be things that IT isn't getting around to, and, there's gonna be some use cases out there that you can say, "Okay, we're gonna pick up this. You guys have explicitly said this is low priority for you, but we need to do it. So if we're gonna try to make it happen using citizen development, and we need you to enable it just for this isolated use case, and then let's see how it works." So that's kind of step one, is get IT and business on board and holding hands and jumping in together. And then from there, what can IT do to, so let's assume now that you've done that and it's been successful, and IT has said, "Okay, yes, we're willing to," I won't say open the floodgates, but we're willing to expand this usage. You do need some guardrails. You need to define where citizen developers cannot play, because I do think that there should be limitations. The example I always give is, we're a toy company, and we've got all kinds of web apps online where kids can go and play games and interact with the brand, and it's great stuff. But that means that we are necessarily collecting some personal identifiable information of children, and that is super, super sensitive. And we are extremely, extremely careful with that information. And one of the things we said is that that's simply off limits for citizen developers. You have to have highly trained data people working with that data. And I think that's a very fair guardrail. But those are the kinds of things that you would want. If you can think of kind of, insurance companies, for instance, having all kinds of patient data that, there's all kinds of confidentiality there. It's going to vary from industry to industry, but there are guardrails. The other thing that I think IT really could do is to just teach citizen developers some of those best practices. I mentioned data quality monitoring, a really important one that is not necessarily intuitive to business users. Just basic stuff, like just check for record counts on your inputs and outputs. Are they consistent day over day or week over week, whatever the cadence is, and check for nulls in your keyed fields, right? Like basic stuff that doesn't occur to us, and that is second nature to IT. I think there's a lot of stuff like that. Documentation. Here's the right way to document these things. You can stand up pretty easily an auto documenter that basically anytime a citizen publishes a new application, it registers, and when you set up there, you can just like Power Automate, Power Apps, or whatever, and just sends an email to the developer. "Hey, you just noticed you put something up there that's new. here's a form of 6 things that we want to know about it to assess the risk of this thing, and make sure that you've documented it properly and perhaps put it on our radar so that we can work with you further if there is any risk to de-risk it and to make sure that it's adhering to whatever protocols we've established. But overall, I think there's a lot of opportunity for IT to hold the hands of citizen developers and teach them some of these best practices. Um, the caveat I would say is that I don't think there's always necessarily the level of rigor required for some of these citizen developments that IT wants to apply, and so they've got to recognize where enough is enough, uh, especially for the smaller things that citizen developers develop. But we do make a lot of small things just to kind of like automate this little spreadsheet here, that little analysis, right? Like, don't overburden them in those situations.
If that's the case where there's typically a lot of small things that provide outstanding value because they solve real problems. Those problems might not be the biggest problems in the organization. Like it's not your entire SNOP process. It's just about being able to generate a specific report at the right granularity, get it to the hands of the right people so that they can go on or push a report into a different system just the way it needs it so that there isn't a person manually copying and pasting or data entry.
Exactly. I talked about those gaps earlier, but you hit on one of the key things about citizen development is that the reason that these gaps exist is often that they're too small to make it to the top of an IT, but collectively they actually save a lot of time and they deliver a lot of value. But individually, they're not things that your tech teams are usually going to spend their time on. They've got bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, I mean, one example that immediately comes to mind is just getting updates from third parties and manually updating the ERP, right? It's like you get all of these reports from suppliers on inventory levels, on order confirmations, from freight forwarders on shipment locations, and you need all of those pieces of information in the ERP and in your business warehouse. Someone needs to go and put that in, and someone's probably spending a hell of a lot of time doing that. And there is no one size fits all solution because it's all different formats, different structures, different pieces of information. Uh, IT is going to have a hard time putting up one system that solves it. Like the solution for that is a supplier portal or a part of it. And that doesn't really work for other reasons that are business reasons. Um, but then there's always, to your point, all of these small gaps that are filled by human beings being infinitely flexible, but incredibly time consuming for them to be so.
Eh, Exactly. Yeah.
So I like how you started from the point of, well, the citizen developers or the business people need to get in a room with IT and all agree to play nice and that there is mutual beneficial value for all of it. One of the things I wonder about is, and I'll take the sarcastic point here for a second. It's like, how realistic is it in our industry? A lot of the conversations we have, and it was mentioned on previous recordings as well, was there's a shortage of skilled workers in our industry across all types of positions in logistics and planning and purchasing and procurement, pretty much across the board. There's fewer and fewer people every year graduating from universities with advanced degrees in supply chain related topics. And a lot of the people in the industry are not, let's call it, they're not digitally native, right? I mean, you and I are comparatively young, despite our old ages, to our peers in the industry sometimes.
Doesn't feel like it, but go on. Yep.
I know what you mean. Mm. Even you probably notice that you're ahead of the curve in terms of adapting new skills and new technologies. And you talked about digital literacy, and I think digital literacy has quite a few levels before understanding SQL and data modeling. I think, the standard data literacy in our industry, for frank, is being really, really freaking good at Excel, right? And I think supply chain people should, second only maybe to finance people in how they use Excel. So how do we bridge the gap as an industry with having the right people? How do we upskill the existing people to be comfortable in this digital world so that they can get in a room with IT and even have the initial conversation?
So that's a great question, and I'm not sure that I've got a good answer to this, honestly. Because the first thing that I was having a conversation with, I think someone at Allbirds a while back, and they were asking for input. How do we improve our sales process, something like that? And I thought back to when I started doing this and kind of saying, what would have been better? It would have been better if I'd had more a stronger, I want to say buy-in because my leadership was bought in, but maybe a more forceful conversation between my leadership and digital leadership to kind of grease the wheels a little bit more. But the challenge there is that at the time I didn't know I needed that because I didn't have the literacy that I had gained since then, right? So it's kind of a chicken and the egg kind of situation where you got to go sometimes learn it the hard way. For me, I guess the first thing that you've got to do, it's a mindset. You've got to not be satisfied with the status quo, which sounds obvious, but I mean, I've seen plenty of situations. So just I'll give you an example. I was talking to a VP of a supply chain at a local manufacturer a while back, and he very proudly talked to him about his Excel lady who had come up with this huge Excel environment that was supporting their S&OP process. And it was splicing together hundreds of Excel files. And I can imagine what it looks like. And I can imagine, I didn't get to talk to Excel lady, unfortunately, but I have suspicions about what her day looks like and, what she's doing. And I'm sitting there thinking like, man, that's a ticking time bomb, but I can't tell him that. He's not going to listen to me. He's satisfied with the status quo. And he won't be until it all falls apart. And I guarantee that's going to fall apart at some point. XLA is going to retire and nobody's going to know how to adapt that DBA. One day it's going to be a mess. And I know how to make it not a mess permanently, but no amount of convincing was going to convince him. So you need to recognize that the status quo isn't good enough. You need to recognize that you cannot run your supply chain in Excel.
I think that's a strong statement, and I think the world is about 100 years away from making that realization potentially.
It does feel that way. Yeah, but I mean, if you're running your supply chain Excel, you have to say, okay, there's one day this is going to fall apart, and then even if it seems like it's working right now, I guarantee that your people, unbeknownst to you, are spending a lot of time pushing buttons in Excel.
Yeah, we worked with a company that managed over 100,000 containers on Google Sheets. That's how I learned, by the way, that there's a million cell restriction for a Google Sheet file, essentially, across all the tabs, which is insane.
That's great. Yeah, I had no idea. Excel claimed to have a million row limit to the lives. That limit far before hitting a million.
And I'm quoting another LinkedIn comment that you made. Uh, I don't think either one of us is an Excel hater, really. I think Excel is one of the most remarkable pieces of software ever built by humankind. I think it's half the reason why Microsoft is such a successful company. I know whole companies that run on PCs because finance needs to run on Excel, because supply chain needs to run on Excel. And I've heard people talk as a very uh, unsavory things about Excel for Macs and Google Sheets. I'll just sum it as it's not Excel, it's Excel for Mac.
Yep, I'll stand by that. Yep, that's why I've got a PC. For
Right. But realistically, I'm often quoted for saying the most common data standard in supply chain is Excel over email. It's by far the most prominent. And to your point, I think in general, a lot of supply chain organizations aren't thinking, how could we do this better? They're just happy. I think we live in a world where so many people are busy fighting fires that they're really just content that it still works.
100%. And yes, I'm not an Excel hater either. I think it's a remarkable tool, but it's not the be all end all, right? There are other tools out there. And but to your point about, I mean, supply chain users, it is kind of surprising because I mean, think about all the continuous improvement initiatives that are out there in supply chain. We're so process oriented, and we're so, the Toyota way, right? Is like gospel. And yet, when it comes to supply chain data, we are very happy to just sit in Excel and let that be our Achilles heel. And it doesn't make any sense to me. I will continue preaching this um, to whoever is willing to listen. So thank you for.
I'll be rooting for you. Okay, with one last question to go, I think I'll be remiss if I don't ask you about the obligatory question about AI and machine learning. So, what's your take on probably the biggest buzzwords in technology today? Everyone's talking about all the magical things and all the wonderful tomorrows that will live once AI and ML are fully implemented. My personal perspective is that we've also lived through this on blockchain 8 years ago. And so while I see the value of AI, I have a hard time seeing it being used. So I'm kind of curious from your perspective, like, what does that look like?
I think, it's amazing, right? Gen AI is incredible, but for me, I think there's a lot more low hanging fruit out there in supply chains that doesn't require AI. I would rather Gen AI, ML, machine learning, like any of it. Like there's so much stuff that you can do just by, and it's all the stuff I was just talking about that you can do to automate things that automate button pushing that is currently taking place. You don't need AI for that. You don't need machine learning for that. You just need data access and a drag and drop SQL writer. And that right, and those are all starting to have AI assistants in them. So like it's getting baked in everywhere. But I mean, I'm sure you've seen it too. Like there are people out there, saying we've got to start implementing AI, but get your data foundations right first. Like that's the key. Get your data in good shape, and otherwise, all this AI is going to be useless.
Yeah, my go-to statement on this is that AI is probably the most garbage in, garbage out thing that humanity has ever created. And if you can't get good data, don't bother spending your time on doing anything that has to do with AI because it's just going to drag you down a rabbit hole that you're never going to get out.
Amen.
Awesome. Bill, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. We'll share the links both to your podcasts and to the deck from that you mentioned from the conference in the notes so that everyone can access those and reach out if they have any questions. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Been great here to be here. Thanks. Thanks so much, Amir.